Once upon a time, up in Western Canada, there was a promotion ran by one of the most well-respected talents ever in the history of professional wrestling, a man named Stu Hart, who was a tough man in the ring, outside the ring. He trained, maimed, tortured, and propped up some of the biggest stars in professional wrestling, and these are some of the stories to come out of the Stampede wrestling territory. And my goodness, Stu Hart and all the stuff that went on, they could have done multiple episodes about this, but this is a very good start. I'm John Retton with my review of Tales from the Territories, Stampede, the Heart of Pro Wrestling. Let me know your thoughts on this show in the comments, please. Let me know your thoughts on the format of Tales from the Territories in general. The roundtable discussion, all that, and the old clips. Is so cool to see these old clips. This way, everybody can talk about professional wrestling without having to see all the stuff that blends together with a lot of the modern stuff. Even though people are well-trained and doing some great stuff, let's be honest, a lot of the shows blend together. This is back when wrestling felt real, and even though obviously there were predetermined things about it, they took it really seriously up there in Stampede. And the panel, only 4 people this time, not 5. Bret Hart, my favorite wrestler of all time. The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. And he will always be my favorite wrestler. Even though other wrestlers got me into wrestling, Bret kept me in wrestling. And you cannot watch a Bret Hart match and really find any holes in them. Can't find any holes in him at all. I mean, unless you get to the latter part of his career, like right after Starrcade 1999, when he wasn't himself because Goldberg didn't catch him on the figure 4 around the post and kicked him in the head and did a whole bunch of other stuff. And even though Goldberg has apologized, I still don't blame Bret Hart for being upset. And I'll say that Bret was right about Shawn, even though he made up with Shawn and Vince. Nevertheless, Bret Hart, still my favorite wrestler of all time. Let's just forget about WrestleMania 26. Let's just forget about that. Let's remember the good times, because Bret definitely had a lot of great times in the ring and even some great times on the mic. And he shared a lot of great stories here. And Dr. D, David Schultz, who should have slapped the fuck out of John Stossel multiple times, broken his jaw, broken every bone in his goddamn body, the right-wing propaganda propping motherfucker that didn't deserve to even see his daughter grow up. I reviewed the Slap Heard Round the World Dark Side of the Ring episode if you really want to hear what I have to say. But yeah, John Stossel, yeah, that guy can fuck off. I mean, I won't miss him when he's gone. It's a shame that actually he didn't suffer traumatic injuries to the point that maybe he decided to, well, no, I'm not going to go too goddamn far there, but nevertheless, maybe his daughter will grow up to be better than he ever was, which really ain't going to be that goddamn hard. Abdul the Butcher, you know, the guy that was the man from Sudan, and the man that knew that Carlos Colon, Jose Gonzalez, and others were involved in the death of Bruiser Brody. And he acted all sad about Bruiser Brody dying on that episode of Dark Side of the Ring, but he knew about it. He still kept going back there. He kept going back to Puerto Rico because he had 5% of the business, and he had to keep going there because nobody was going to really book him. He was never a wrestler. He was an attraction. By the time it got to the 90s, it was really goddamn ridiculous, and anybody would want to book Abdul the Butcher. I don't like Abdul the Butcher, in case you can't tell. And Bobby Bass, no class Bobby Bass. I'm not familiar with him at all. I think they just wanted to find somebody that was still around from the Stampede days. It's a shame they couldn't have gotten any of the Hart brothers. Maybe none of them wanted to appear. So, Stampede in Calgary, responsible for some of the biggest stars. Bret, Owen. It's a real shame what happened to Owen. There's so many great talents that came in and out. Brian Pillman. Archie the Stomper Goldie, who was the Mongolian Stomper down here. Jake Snake Roberts worked there. JYD when he was Sylvester Ritter. And a lot of other people. Dynamite Kid, before he became an abusive piece of shit and decided to threaten his goddamn wife with, holding a gun to her. Yeah, Dynamite Kid deserved every bad thing that happened to him. So, but Stu Hart, he trained and he maimed people. He would, if you said the pro wrestling world was fake, I hate using that word, he would prove to you, let me show you, hold. And you can't help but not to try to do a Stu Hart impression. And all the great stuff, just looking at my notes here, all the Hart kids either got involved in wrestling in the ring or married wrestlers. And the Hart family tree, it just continues to grow and grow and grow. It's astonishing. So, Abdullah the Butcher, to his credit, was a monster. An attraction, sold out everywhere, was a big boost to Stampede wrestling business. And I did note again, David Schultz slapped John Stossel a lot harder. A lot harder. I mean, you wouldn't have hurt his brain because people like John Stossel and anybody that believes what he does, they don't actually have brains. They never were born with brains. They just somehow developed the ability to spout hate and rhetoric. Stu, he when he was like, I think Brett was like, at high school for something. I don't remember if it was for wrestling or what it was, but these coaches called pro wrestling fake. Again, I hate to use that word. And let me show you how, and he's just twisting around and contorting this guy. And if I had ever gotten into wrestling, I would have been so goddamn scared to ever be like near Stu. Stu was barely a kindly old guy, but he just because of how he was brought up, and they really should try to do a dark side of the ring on Stu, or maybe like a Tales from the Territories and talk about Stu growing up and stuff like that, and find a way to have archive footage or whatever. They should find a way to tell Stu Hart's story, because just how he grew up and how he got into wrestling and the lean times and the great times in Stampede are told here. This was better than the championship wrestling from Florida one, because I feel they could have done more with the Florida one, and maybe they shot more footage, and maybe they'll have a way to do a second season of this. Maybe they'll have bonus episodes, hey, more tales from Florida, because I can't imagine that that's all the footage that they shot. The infamous Hart dungeon. Well, Brad would have friends over. They're not killing each other down there, or they're not killing people down there, but it just sounds close to it. Jim Neidhart being tortured, Brett doing laundry and hoping that his dad didn't see him, because otherwise, Dad, hey, Brad, let me show you a hold. God, Stu. And he sounded so kindly and elderly. And like, I think with that high school story, I think Brett said he was like, Stu was in his like 60s, like 50s or 60s. And it's just fucking incredible. Stu, doing all the torturous stuff that he did. He was always well respected as a payoff man. Him, Paul Bosch, Sam Muchnick in St. Louis, Paul Bosch in Houston, Don Owen in Portland Wrestling. But Stu would always make sure people were paid well, and Abby would talk about that, Abdul the Butcher, and that somebody tried to steal one of Stu's cars, and Brett was woken up by all this ruckus, and he had the guy on the counter in the kitchen, was torturing him, didn't call the police, called the parents picked him up. He actually gave the guy, it was a kid, a job, like a teenage kid, a job as an usher at the wrestling shows, and he worked there. I don't know how long he worked there, but Stu could be a good guy. After he tortured and stretched him, you basically wanted to die rather than face that pain again. Andre the Giant was big in Calgary until there was a point where he was supposed to make a show in Montana. Smith, who can't drive for shit, was driving all over the goddamn place, all this stuff and whatever, and what ended up happening is Andre was so pissed, Brett had to make up a story because the police were chasing him, so he made up the story that Smith was promoting the show and Andre had to get out there and the flight had been missed, and Andre didn't talk to Stu again. I don't blame Andre, because Andre could hold a grudge. If Andre trusted you, then you were trusted for life. If you broke that trust, he wouldn't trust you anymore. Brett finally got Andre to warm up to him again, and I don't blame. I don't know if Andre never talked to Stu again, but he definitely didn't talk to him for a while. And then more of Abdullah the Butcher's wrestling, which hardcore wrestling isn't wrestling. Deathmatch wrestling isn't wrestling. I will stand by that. I will die on that hill. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it. And he didn't speak much. He was garbled. Of course, this one waitress at this restaurant said, I won't tell anybody, but I know you can speak English. Mongolian Stomper, Archie the Stomper Golding, or Goldie. Sweet Daddy Siki. They didn't really mention much about Sweet Daddy Siki. I'm disappointed. I want to know more about him. And David Schultz. All the heels. They were all worried for their lives. Outside the ring, especially, David Schultz talked about how people wanted to try to kidnap his daughter because that's how much he had. Heels had to watch, what was going on even in the parking lot. And then Abdullah the Butcher, Abdullah the Butcher took on Stu. He had attacked a couple of the kids. Brett was kicking at Abby. And then, then Abdul was going to reach around and grab him and reach around. Ooh, reach around on a kid. And kind of gross. Let's not talk about that. He was going to punch him out. Stomper had made promos because he was a vicious heel, how he was going to chew the Hart house down brick by brick. But then Brett saw that his mother handed Archie the check when he came to the Hart house. And he was all scared because he was a kid. And then he realized that there was something going on with wrestling. And I believe the quote was in some other interview with Helen, because Helen was from New York. Paul Bosch actually introduced Stu and Helen Hart to each other. And I think might have introduced Helen to Stu. I don't remember exactly how it went. But just how Helen would talk because she's from New York. Oh, Archie. We're supposed to be incognitus. Good old Family Guy back when it was good. And then there were a lot of ribs being played. LSD being put in coffee or drinks if you left the drinks around. So David Schultz was all tripping. So once he came down from that, he went home and his wife was making cookies. He's like, do me a favor, make me about an extra 25 or 30 of those. He put X-Lax in them. So now he put some regular cookies on top and made sure to made sure to eat them. And he ate the regular ones, the ones that didn't have X-Lax. So everybody else was all, he had to play along like that. But he thought, I didn't get him back enough, so I put this liquid horse X-Lax on. It's funny because when he died, everybody had stomach issues. And then there was something called a Mabel party, basically a rib where a pretty girl would hit on you, but it would actually turn out to be something where the wrestlers would pretend to go along with this, and then this woman would hit on you, and then somebody would burst in as the husband and shoot the wrestlers with blanks, and they would have ketchup packets. And the Great Antonio was mentioned. Look up Antonio Inoki versus the Great Antonio if you want to see a match that just dissolves into a shoot. Because the Great Antonio didn't sell anything, and Antonio Inoki's like, okay, boom, boom. He just starts the shit out. It's incredible. Fucking incredible. Rest in peace, Antonio Inoki. Apparently the Great Antonio actually did die, and I feel... Apparently he died on the streets, and that is terrible. That actually is terrible. Great way to see that match, though. Watch him just beat the shit out of this guy that was basically a freak show athlete. Anyway, a lot more ribs going on. And then driving in the snow, 50 below zero, all the snow's blowing off the road. It can't even melt because that's how cold it is in Calgary and in the northern areas. No thank you. Fuck all that. Fuck all that. No. I don't even like the snow here. I live in Washington State. I don't even like the snow here. And then, like, they talk about being broke down on buses or whatever. They need help. And shows would go on, but it was really, really tough to do that. And Brett has admitted that's one thing he doesn't miss about wrestling. Even though Brett hasn't wrestled in a number of years, he doesn't miss the trips up there. And then Bad News Allen, Bad News Brown for WWE fans got mentioned, and they just buried the fuck out of this guy. It absolutely destroyed him. He would go to Japan, he would get all, tough and all his chops and no-sell this stuff and everything, so he'd come back and he'd do that, and he'd break out a fork in the commission, the Calgary Province Athletic Commission, or whatever it's actually called. I know they have provinces, not states, up in Canada. I know that much about the geography. But he would keep forking wrestlers. Gross. So he'd keep getting suspended. And they flat out destroyed Bad News Allen. Cut him off at the knees. Fitting, because his knees were really, really bad by the 80s. And Archie was going to turn babyface. They had this guy come and play his son. And the idea was Bad News Allen was going to go up. They were going to do all this stuff. He was going to pile drive the kid on the floor. And he said to Bruce, I believe. I think it was Bruce Hart. Not Bruce Pritchard. Fuck Bruce Pritchard, by the way. Hey, can I use the fork? No, don't use the fork, commission, all this stuff and everything. Well, he did that, and then he used the fork. And then this old man who was like 90, who was a lifelong fan, is upset. And, because old people, that's back when old people actually bought into wrestling and everything. So they were lifelong fans from when they were 9 up to when they were 90. And he did that, and Bad News Allen, instead of just seeing this old man and like, yeah, whatever, he ain't worth it, he picks him up by the hair and he abuses this fan. Well, that causes a lot of people to get upset. I believe Ed Whalen, who was the announcer, or ring announcer. Is he a ring announcer or interview? I'm trying to remember. I don't know as much about Stampede as I should. he quit that night. And then Bad News Allen caused another riot in Edmonton. So that basically stopped that town from having, Stampede Wrestling. And it started to erode the territory. And then Vince McMahon bought the territory from Stu, but never paid him for it. I think maybe he might have made one payment. I think it was for $1 million. He might have made one $100,000 payment. That's it. And Bret Neidhart and the Bulldogs came down in that deal, and that was it. And then Stu got stiffed on the deal. And then it did get restarted. Stampede did get restarted and then shut down officially in 1989. Did feature Owen Hart, Brian Pillman, and a few others in the latter days of it. But it didn't last. It didn't last much longer. It was never going to be what it was, in part because people kept going to New York or other territories, and also when talent dries up, you can't keep running a promotion. So that was pretty goddamn good. It was really good to hear from Brad. Great to hear from David Schultz. God, it's great to hear from him. And that's pretty much it right there. So next week is Polynesian Pro Wrestling, Hawaiian Wrestling. And that's going to be an interesting one. I can't wait for that. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.